we are going to do a multiple linear regression, and we are going to make sure that there is some kind of disparity in this desk review before we start requesting more data from you to be able to move forward for subsequent requests. All right, just going to try to grab the mouse back so I can move to the next slide.
Yeah, and as you're doing that, Thomas, just adding in that people are often familiar with the terminology of trigger tests, so that when OFCCP was collecting data, everyone wanted to know, what are they going to do to decide whether I have a problem or not? And the consensus and what they used to, clarify that they would do is some form of trigger test based on the different items you have shown us here. And it's those the fact that the interesting twist is not only are they no longer defining what a trigger test might be, they're essentially not using a trigger test anymore. They're going more unilaterally straight towards the statistical regression.
But they're going to have two levels of statistical regression. They're going to have the one that is transparently laid out, and that they're still calling their desk review. They're not going to, at least according to how 1805 is written, they're not going to make a judgment based upon that regression to say that there definitely is pay discrimination, but it is the trigger that's going to make them look deeper and ask for even more information from you, the company, to really dive in and see if it's just a problem with this job group, or B, if they can find more systemic issues. So that goes greatly into this next thing, which is multiple linear regression. Before, in Directive 307, the OFCCP could only use it very sparingly, and mainly that was because the contractor community, to protect a lot of things when it came from OFCCP regulation, the thought process was have as many job titles as possible. If you have 650 people working for your company, you need to have 650 job titles: admin assistant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, senior admin assistant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, since Directive 1805 has come out, and the federal court system, experts such as myself and others recognize that multiple linear regression is absolutely the best way to be able to tell if there truly is a difference because of race and or gender. They're not doing so much by job titles, but asking you to create job families and job groups. And we'll get into that more later with the next comment. But what multiple linear regression is a statistician's best possible way to control for certain variables that should directly relate to pay differentials. Things like time in job, time with company, education, external experience, certifications that they have that are specific to their job, et cetera, et cetera. Be able to statistically control for all of that information that absolutely should be able to identify why person A makes more than person B. And once all of those variables are controlled for, then look at, okay, now that all of that is equal, what is the difference that can only be attributed to the fact that the person is a female, or that the fact that the person is a Hispanic, or potentially a Hispanic female, if the OFCCP decides to combine race and gender together. So that's what the power of multiple linear regression is instead of writing narratives of this person has a master's degree and they have 10 years of experience, we statistically can write those narratives and control for all that data to be able to look at what is the true disparity due to gender, race, or gender and race. In order to do that, we have to have some kind of definition about what is a pay analysis group, what is a similarly situated evaluation group, or similarly situated employee group, depending on who's defining it. The goal of that is to identify people who are viewed as equal in complexity, viewed as similar function, et cetera, to be able to combine job titles together to create a job group so that the OFCCP can analyze using multiple linear regression. And since that's their goal now, and they weren't able to really do that before because their hands were kind of tied to job titles, people like me and consultants used to give the advice, don't worry about it. Create a comp structure that makes it as difficult as possible for the OFCCP to analyze your data. Have as many job titles as possible. But now we've got the OFCCP directly gives advice to us and to you on how you need to structure your comp. You need to create what's best for your organization. So do you want to look at it from EEO, job code? Do you want to look at it by AAP job group? Do you want to look at it by function? So department, human resources, separated from accounting, separated from finance. How do you want and how do you structure your comp so that we can then combine those jobs together, control for all those variables, and then determine the impact of race and gender?
Thomas?
Yes, go ahead.
Just as adding on to this, I've been dabbling in this for what seems like 100 years. For many years, especially under the Obama administration or even going back to the Bush administration, people were trying to focus on compensation by job title. And even now, especially since we're submitting data by title, people would talk about using analyses by title, running trigger tests by title. And I just wanted to add the layer to say that despite the fact that that was the standard for quite a few years going back, that really no longer exists. And I believe it would not be accepted as a standard of analysis by OFCCP.
Correct. It would not be accepted today. They have defaults, and I think we get to this a little bit later in the slides, but if you propose something that they don't agree with how you want them to do it, they will default back to your AAP job groups, and if you don't have AAP job groups, then they default back to EEO codes. And I don't think anybody wants that, because then your professionals group could be thousands of people when it really should be separated out better by function and by other reasons to create smaller sample sizes. So yet also there was a lot of complaints to the OFCCP about it was all behind the scenes. Nobody at the company or consultants or external attorneys, nobody knew what was happening, and there was no involvement in understanding their data analysis, and it's because they completely shielded it. But now, like the organization has the opportunity, should you reach out and grasp it, which you really, really should, you have the opportunity to proactively define what your compensation job groups are, run a proactive analysis on your compensation to determine your risk, and then fix that risk before you get an audit. So you've got a really good opportunity to get all of that done. Whereas before, nobody could really proactively do much. So going back to what our advice used to be under Directive 307, have as many jobs as possible, which is why a lot of government contractors look like this. There's just so many job titles, and it's usually the only thing that separates them out is experience. And then if you were a government contractor that provided employees directly to the government, you wouldn't have internal job titles. So if one person was called a Network Systems Administrator 2 under one contract, and you had another contract with a different group within the government, they might be called Systems Administrator 2, and that's great. They're doing the exact same job for two different government groups, but they have different job titles, and that's perfect for you, because the more job titles, the better under 307. You were told to push back hard on comp data requests. Keep asking for extensions. Push the OFCCP back. Don't let them get your data. Try to get everything down to where they were basically trusting narratives. They had no ability to statistically prove anything. And the less structure you had around compensation, the better under 307. It's kind of the wild, wild west approach. Almost kind of sound like you don't know what you're doing. That way they don't know what you're doing, and that makes it harder for them to be able to pin any kind of accusation of pay discrimination. Under 1805, though, we have very, very clear idea of what organizations should be doing so that the OFCCP doesn't fall back to its defaults of doing AAP job groups or EEO groups, categories. First of all, you need to be creating meaningful job families and groups by function, by department, however it is that you feel that it would delineate a group of people as different from another group of people based upon your pay strategies. So do you want to do EEO subcategories? So instead of just leaving it as professionals, you might have 2A and 2B and 2C and things like that, and be able to spread out professionals by function, by department. You may want to actually do the work of doing studies on comparable worth and have somebody come in and do job analyses and create complex compensation matrices to identify which employees are functionally the same, even though they might be doing things in the company. But what you want to do now is go through 1805, and we'll show you this information on a later slide that tells you exactly what information, what data they are going to ask from you after item 19, and start figuring out how to collect that data now. Because if you get an audit and they receive item number 19, at some point they will probably send you a request for subsequent data, and you only have 15 days to comply. And like I said, since all of that information is published in the directive, they're not granting that many extensions because their comeback is you've had since July of 2018 to prepare for this. We also highly recommend that you know your data. So once you've created these job groups, you should proactively be looking at multiple linear regression analysis and understand that anecdotal differences are not, those narratives are not going to sway the compliance officers like they used to. They're much more statistically bound now. And if the statistics say there's a problem, there's a problem. So the overall kind of operational advice is that the more structure you have around compensation under 1805, the better you are going to be prepared to defend yourself. And if you've done proactive analyses and cleared everything up, you won't be defending yourself because you know everything's going to be fine. They're going to do the analysis exactly how you've told them to do it. They're not going to find anything. They're going to walk away.
Thomas, if I could.
Absolutely.
Yeah, going into the history of affirmative action, for years and years and years, contractors weren't terribly concerned about compensation because the general consensus was that OFCCP didn't have a rock-solid game plan for getting deep into it and being able to prove compensation discrimination. For years and years, the results of pay equity reviews were light. There weren't a lot of settlements. There weren't a lot of big dollar settlements. And even OFCCP even dabbled with average salaries back in the day, in the 90s and things of that nature. So, when the regulations under 60-2.17 just said you're required to evaluate your pay on an annual basis to make sure your systems aren't discriminatory, people might just have a meeting or run some general analyses, and they really didn't go in and focus on comp structure or didn't bring a lot of fear to the table when it came to speaking with leadership. So I just wanted to clarify that the environment now is different. Settlements, 6 and 7 figure settlements related to compensation are increasing. And it's becoming, when I'm doing training presentations, I talk about two things that really create financial responsibility for federal contractors in an audit. And that's hiring analyses and compensation analyses. Most other things that would fall under problems in an audit may go into a conciliation agreement where you're just adjusting a problem or fixing something that you're not doing. and there are no financial ramifications. But pay equity now has legitimate financial ramifications. It's not just pie in the sky anymore.
Definitely, and there's, as Chris has talked about, there's really three masters of this right now. There's the Department of Labor through the OFCCP, there's the Department of Justice through the EEOC, and in multiple states, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Washington State, Oregon, California, et cetera, are passing, very strong pay equity laws, mostly around gender. Some of them both gender and gap and race, and then in New Jersey, there's like 17 different categories. So there's a lot of things going on, and it's a very important thing to keep up with. So we'll kind of move on a little bit, just kind of talk about. These are just some recommendations, some recommended steps of things that you can do to change your philosophy or update your philosophy around compensation planning. So first, you can record how you're doing anything now. What are your current programs that you have? Do you do different compensation programs by department, division, level in the organization? The higher you go, the better the bonus, the variable pay. Is there a different way of compensating sales from regular staff? Make sure all of that is very well documented. Decide if those current programs are meeting the goal of the organization's mission and vision. And if it's not, then it's time to look into making a change. Identify the last time that you did a market analysis or salary survey. External validity is key. Knowing where you are in the market is a key determinant to understanding your future internal equity decisions. Do you have, at the executive level, a current mandate for equal work for equal pay? Why or why not? And can that change? What's the highest level person at the organization that you can get to agree that this is important, and how much are they willing to agree? Are they willing to tell you, yeah, I think this is important, or are they willing to go to the CEO and fight for it? Can each employee explain how they are paid? Do they understand what factors go into determining why they make X number of dollars per year? That there's credit given for their education and how much? That there's credit given for the fact that they have 3 different certifications and how much? And if employees started walking around today, knocking on each other's office doors and visiting each other in their cubes and saying, hi, I'm a systems administrator and I make $76,000 a year, would you freak out? If you would, then chances are there's the potential that there is pay disparity that needs to be addressed. And more than just, there's tons of state laws out there. I think it's 22 now that ban organizations from having any repercussions for employees discussing their pay. And yesterday, in the House of Representatives, the Paycheck Fairness Act passed, which would make it a federal law that encourages employees to walk around and discuss their pay. And all of these are designed to put pressure on organizations to make sure that you shouldn't be worried about that. Because this is a uniquely kind of American thing. This worry is, if you go to Europe or other countries, they list the pay that a person would make in a job description right there on the job description. Everybody knows how much that person is going to make. Other steps to creating a compensation philosophy. So the first thing you need to do is identify where you want to be in the market. Do you want to be a leader? So you want to go after the best and the brightest and steal people from your competitors? Do you want to just kind of compete where you're competing with your competitors, or do you want to be a lagger? Do you, because of budgetary reasons or whatever, do you need to pay below median? And basically, in some ways what that's going to do is make you a training house. People will come to you, they will work for you, and learn how to do the job until they can get the foot in the door in a competitor or a leader that pays more. You need to determine your external equity. You need to do a market analysis and salary survey, and you need to treat these with a little bit of a grain of salt. because market analysis and salary surveys are based upon, in a lot of ways, biased data. If we recognize that there is a wage gap, then we recognize that salary surveys refer to that wage gap as well. So you need to take that with a grain of salt, and this is why you need to have a professional do your market analysis and salary survey so that they can make recommendations around adjustments that should be there in order to help with pay equity. You should create pay grades and bands. If you don't have them now, you should definitely have them because they are typically the number one predictor of differences in pay. You need to define your organization's job, family, and groupings. Do you want to use departments? Do you want to do across departments? So using something, that's typically called comparable worth. That way you're comparing somebody in accounting to somebody in HR to somebody in finance to somebody in engineering because they mean the same. The value that they have to the organization is exactly the same. Or do you want to use those EEO categories and subcategories? This is all up to you. You just need to be able to justify why you've chosen doing what you've done. And then you should also be prepared to review all HR department policies, procedures, and processes for best practices, and not just best practices that you see in a white paper, but best practices for pay equity. The example that I always like to use for this is starting pay. A best practice, if you read, Harvard Business Review and other things, is to offer someone 10% more than they were making at their last job. So let's use that example. You're hiring for the job of electrical engineer, and you have two applicants that you're going to hire. One is a female who currently makes $80,000, and one is a male who currently makes $100,000. Your policy is to offer 10% more. That's great. So that means the female is going to be making $88,000 and the male is going to be making $110,000. They have the same qualifications. So what used to be a $20,000 difference between the male and the female at your company is now a $22,000 difference. So what we encourage you to do is to be able to review all of these policies and procedures and put into place where you're paying for the job, not the person. So these are all the things that you need to be willing to look at. How do you select and hire? How do you do starting pay? How do you do performance management? Is it objective? Is it truly objective, or is it based upon the opinion of that person's manager? Right? How do you do learning and development? How do you do opportunity? Do you ensure that there truly is equal opportunity? Or is it just something that's offered and then pushed by managers? And then how do you do benefits and variable pay plans? Because something that always sneaks up, especially since the OFCCP released 1805, is that the OFCCP can look at this data by either base pay or total compensation. Something that always sneaks up in a way on employers is benefits, because those are technically employee elected. But there always tends to be some kind of bias that's not intended at all, but the statistics don't really take into account whether it's intended or not around benefits. Because it tends to be more males electing family coverage of health insurance and more females electing individual or individual plus child. And there is a huge difference usually in how much a company pays towards that. And if it's not equal, that technically is a part of total compensation and helps to widen the gap of annual base pay between males and females.
Thomas, if I could.
Absolutely.
A couple of years ago when OFCCP expanded their itemized listing in the audit letter, the focus for a very long time was essentially a snapshot of base pay. So it's important to note that if you get audited by OFCCP, they are going to separately collect base pay and the factors that go into total pay, such as commissions and bonuses, things of that nature, or even stock purchases or stock distribution, things like that. So total pay is much more on the table than it used to be. And the OFCCP much better has the ability to see if some of those factors individually are distributed in a way that favors one group over the other. And for a long time, people didn't really have to worry about that, at least from an OFCCP audit perspective. But the itemized listing now is very specific about asking for those things, and it's a very big difference.
It is. So, as we know, OMB has approved item 19, and it takes, 50 years to get that kind of form to change. So item 19 is going to be exactly the same under 1805. But again, the OFCCP is much less likely to grant any extensions. There are additional requests that will come out after they review some of the information that you've done in item 19, and we'll show those on the next slide. But again, the transparency of this OFCCP process leads the compliance officers into really a no excuses approach. They're not going to accept delays because you say, look, this information is on this server, and this information is in our HCM, and this information is in our L&D, and we need some time to pull all that. They're going to say, you should have known this since July. And so,
Thomas, if I could jump in again?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, and I usually try to wait until you're concluding a topic, but for those attending, I wonder how many of you are aware that the OFCCP just this week published their warning letter of impending audits, what we commonly call the CSAL, or Corporate Scheduling Announcement Letter. In other words, OFCCP has posted online everyone that they expect to audit in the near future. They have posted the format that the audit will be in, and there's actually 5 different ways that a person could be audited, a company. Many of you are familiar with your desk audit. You're familiar with the corporate management compliance review, or what used to be called like a class ceiling audit, done at corporate, or functional audits, but they've also re-included a compliance check, checking in to see if people have their AAPs in place, as well as the new item called the Section 503 Focus Review, where they're going to go on site, or presumably go on site. I have to go back and reread the questions. They just posted them this week, but they're going to do an actual focus review on the individual with a disability plan and the activities surrounding that. So if you haven't seen that online, please check our blog or ask us for the link, or just go in and look it up online. You can Google it, but everyone who's being audited in the near future is now listed online.
Yep, and here you go. Here's that additional, information that they're going to be asking for. So they're going to know, job type, number of hours worked, their leave status as of right now, or during any time of the planned year. What are their pay actuals, bonus, incentive, equity, total compensation, any perks, any signing bonuses, et cetera, et cetera. What's their time and position, previous relevant experience. If you don't have this previous relevant experience, they will use a proxy variable, which is age. And that's it's not good. So it'd be really good for you to have be able to get relevant experience. So all of this information is, what they are going to ask for the second time. And then there's this little thing down at the bottom of their request, which I kind of tried to do it in a similar way, just put it down at the bottom. They're going to request for any salary surveys, market analysis, and any pay equity studies that you've done in the past. And the reason I put this down here as well is I say that you should be doing both of these. One of them you can do without any kind of attorney-client privilege. That's no big deal to do a salary service or market analysis. But if you decide to do a pay equity study, you really, really should engage with an expert consultant who is working for an external attorney that provides you the most protection to make sure that you don't have to just immediately hand the results of any study that you've done over the past 5 years to the OFCCP for their review. All right, so here's basic recommendations. This is what you should be doing proactively as a kind of a summary. 1, you need to be developing your compensation philosophy. It's not necessarily easy to do, but the nice thing is that the OFCCP gives you their best practices. They give you what they want to see. And unless you are a healthcare facility or a university, which tend to be very unique around compensation, it should apply to you. If you are healthcare or university, then you definitely need help of external counsel and a consultant, because that gets murky fast. You need to be reviewing your strategy, your comp structure. You need to figure out the way that you want to combine jobs, create job families, and be able to legally defend why you've done what you've done. You should be proactively analyzing your data to identify your risk, and then working with someone to help you fix it if you find anything. And then you definitely need to review your state pay equity laws. And if you're in places like California, Pennsylvania, Illinois, you might even have municipal and county laws on top of your state law that you need to pay attention to. So multiple masters when it comes to pay equity. Okay, here's just again kind of a step of recommended steps. First thing you should definitely do is find a sponsor. The highest title you can get that's going to be willing for you to throw their name and their title behind it. You need to determine how you want to protect this. Again, external legal protection is best. Run some kind of SWOT analysis on your current plan of compensation and identify what your priority is of things that you need to fix, because you can't do it all at one time. Identify where all of your data is. Where is all of the HR data that is being stored at your company, and start to get it now and start to analyze that raw data to look for those risks. And then finally, create your project plan to fix this moving forward, and do this before you get that audit, because once you've got the audit, it's too late. Any risk that's found is there. There's no chance to fix it then. Chris, I'll let you take back over.
Oh, thanks, Thomas. Obviously, you carried the weight today, but I know everyone is starting to get probably a little bleary-eyed because of so much information. But we hope that you have the slides. We hope that you make use of some of the resources that we provide. You can follow our blog. By all means, you can reach out to us if you want some more detailed information. We've got white papers and access to links and access to the audit lists, and you can even find OFCCP enforcement statistics online. So if we can be of assistance in this area, our team of PhDs is ready to help on that, or in affirmative action planning. We're pretty darn good at it. So by all means, thank you all so much for attending. Hope to see you at a future session. Have a great afternoon, and I'll turn it back over to Lauren in case we want to grab a few questions.
Thanks. We actually do have a few minutes left in our hour, so I thought I would tackle a couple of the questions that have come in. We have one here about pay grades, and can they be a job grouping? Is that something you guys could address?
Yeah, I can absolutely address that. Right now, Title VII restricts the OFCCP and EEOC from using pay grade as a job grouping. It allows you to use it as a variable, but right now, pay grades cannot be used as a job grouping. If the Paycheck Fairness Act eventually passes, I don't think it's going to pass this administration, but I don't think the Senate's going to pass it. And if they did for some reason, I definitely don't think the president would sign it. But if we do have a change of the guard in 2020, starting in 2021, and the Paycheck Fairness Act as written now passes, then yes, you can use pay grades as a job grouping.
Okay, that was a great answer. Thanks. We have another good question here. How about using a sliding job market to set starting pay? How do you react to that?
That's always a fun one. So we're located outside. We're located in our home office in New Orleans, Louisiana. So we deal a lot with the engineers that are working on the oil rigs, and that's a question that we get all the time from these engineering firms, that When there's engineers aplenty and the oil industry isn't doing that great, they can hire engineers at a very low rate. But when the oil industry is hot and there's a lot of offshore drilling happening and there's fewer engineers in the market, then they have to pay a premium. Basically, that's kind of twofold. Statistically, right, the things that you expect to be able to predict pay are time in job and time with company. And what that does is completely destroy those variables from being effective, because you might have 10 or 15 new hires that you've made over the few months making more than your seasoned employees. So there's a danger there that in a way it neuters those variables from being able to work. However, statistically, it may not throw you into any problem as long as opportunity is equal. So when times are low, you're hiring males and females and races equally to when times are great. But if it works out that you're hiring more females when there's a flood of engineers in the market and you're meeting your goals, your AAP goals during that time, and then you're hiring, it seems like you're hiring more males during the time in which the salaries are being commanded at a much higher rate, then you're going to have disparity, and you cannot use, the market said we had to pay this much. Because if you would have hired that female at the same time, she would have been making just as much.
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for one more. Okay, this is a good one. What about senior leaders and executives? Is that different from other groups?
Very, very different. Typically, we want to be able to analyze the senior leaders separately, because depending on what industry you're in and how your compensation is set up, the bulk of their take-home pay on a yearly basis probably doesn't come from their annual salary. It probably comes from some sort of variable pay. So there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done to determine if those programs are being applied equally, evenly, or if they're at the discretion of a manager. Anytime you hear someone like me say, "Is it at the discretion of a manager?" That's the part where we get really concerned, because that's where latent biases can come in. The more objective your programs are in HR, the less you have to worry, except for the problems that may have happened upon entry into the position because of starting pay. But if performance reviews are straight up objective, if talent management is objective, if the variable pay for executives and below is objective, then you're probably not, increasing starting pay disparity by factors of 12. But if there is a lot of gut feeling, independent kind of decisions being made by managers without much structure from HR, then there's the possibility that there's rampant pay disparity at your organization that could latch on to race or gender.
Okay, well, that's going to bring us right toward the edge of our time. So I just wanted to say thank you to you both for a fantastic overview today. I think this was hugely helpful. Just a couple of closing remarks. We will be reaching out to all of our attendees today with a link to this slide presentation, so you will have availability to that shortly. If you have any questions, please reach out to the team at Outsolve. You can also reach out to us at America's Job Exchange. We were thrilled to have you attend with us today. We will be doing monthly HR-specific webinars, so please visit our website to learn more about those. This will conclude our webinar on strategies for navigating OFCCP's Compensation Directive. Thanks again to our partners at Outsolve. Thomas and Chris, it was great having you, and thanks to you all for attending. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.